Now we will touch on biocentrism and ecocentrism, which thankfully challenge the previous two concepts in rather fundamental ways. I will state my bias here that I agree more so with these perspectives than anthropocentrism and speciesism. That's why you have your own readings to do for this week, and I really do want to always encourage you to critically think as you watch these videos and go find other resources and other videos that you like, because it's still really important for you to be able to make up your own mind regarding the frameworks that make the most sense to you. So that's why I am presenting my bias now, and if I get passionate, that's why. Biocentrism and ecocentrism really work to disrupt the hierarchical system presented by anthropocentrism and speciesism that we have just looked at. And because of that, it really reworks how we understand the connection between humans and all other living things. So the idea of biocentrism and ecocentrism, which we will go over, really arose, at least in a Western context, when ecology as a discipline and practice started to gain popularity and credibility. And I'm saying in a Western context because there are many cultures, particularly indigenous cultures globally, that have always thought like this and or known about these concepts. They've just been simply labelled later on within an academic discipline of ecology. So for example, First Nations people in Australia discuss and have discussed interconnection between people and country for more than 60,000 years. So in the 60s, ecology really established concrete evidence to propose the true interconnectedness between humans and the natural world, which eventually established a scientifically proven way to study these relationships, which is always really significant. If you can prove something, you can make it substantial. And this really contrasted the original assumptions that humans had, many of us had, that really just we were dominating of the natural world. We weren't in relationship with it. Another way we can describe this interconnection is through the word interdependence. So ecology has come to understand that humans will experience a consequence if they continue to destroy the natural world, because we are the natural world, or we are of nature, and we have a very detailed dependency or intricate dependency on it, and this ecological balance that we have. So the growth of this new perspective in Western culture did then lead to the questioning of the original anthropocentric ideology. Questions like, how can we be the top if we are dependent on everything else? How can we give features of the earth a lower intrinsic value when we ourselves come from the earth, as everything else does as well? So biocentrism sees all aspects of the natural world as also having inherent value and not just an instrumental value, meaning everything of the natural world, which is everything, is valuable in and of itself and should then be treated as such. And that is really it. We could definitely talk about the value of its beauty, the value of its uniqueness, which is all true, but to an extent, it doesn't really matter for this argument. The point is that it is just valuable in and of itself. It has the inherent right to then exist or live in a desirable way, in a way that's not impacted then by some other entity. And a massive part of ethics is that people do not just have the right to live, but actually have the right to a good life, a life that's well lived. And if we then are the same as everything else in the natural world, then everything else also is entitled to that right to live and exist and do so well. Similar, the idea of ecological balance does relate to the moral concept of respect, and this is the idea we have learnt from a really, really young age. I'm sure if you respect me, then I should respect you. If features of the planet respect us by looking after us, by caring for us, but also having value in and of themselves, then I should also give them respect back. This is a really famous quote from Jeremy Bentham, Bentham, I've never actually said his name out loud, Jeremy Bentham, who was a philosopher amongst other things, and he said, talking about animals and plants in this context, that the question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So even though as we learn more and more, we've come to learn that many plants and animals can actually reason very well and talk very well and have emotions and even have culture. It's not the point right now in the argument. Not all things can talk, not all things have a language. So for the sake of moral logic, many arguments tend to focus on this concept of suffering. Can they suffer being the main question? Because if something can suffer, meaning they are then sentient, they have a consciousness, they can experience and suffer, they are then like us and so deserve to be treated as such. So an anthropocentric perspective would argue that because they cannot reason or talk like us, then they are lesser and so they can be treated lesser. But Bentham rightfully pointed out it isn't really the question to focus on. Humans cannot and have not historically understood other animals' reasoning or language, so it's rather unfair to use that as a criteria for superiority. Instead, if a being can suffer, meaning they are sentient and experience consciousness, emotion, and understanding, they are then the same as us, as we suffer and we emote and we express and we understand. So yeah, that is the basic idea. Surely if they suffer the same as us, they should be treated as us. So to just define it broadly before we continue, biocentrism is a worldview like the others that we've looked at that respects nature because it conceptualizes nature to be an entity that itself gives life, creates life. And this naturally then does instruct us to never harm it and to protect it when required, so that a moral circle goes on. It gives us life so that we can give it life, and so on and so forth for the generations. I really loved the first reading that you had to do for this week, when the author talked about how humans have constructed our own right to give the natural world value when we came from it. And it's a very interesting entitlement and separation that we've really created that isn't true or real, at least in my opinion. And I do really encourage you to have a look at some newish research coming out about the consciousness of trees and plants and ecosystems and fungi. Also the sophistication of some animals' social structures, like orcas in particular. They have like quite a sophisticated culture, and it's really interesting, which we, at least in a Western culture, have completely misjudged and underestimated. A quote that summarizes this concept really well, and I would actually use for my notes, is a thing, meaning being, is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of a biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So anything hurtful to ourselves and to other members of the ecological community is seen as immoral and therefore a wrong thing to do. And anything that cares for this community and also ourselves as we're members is then seen as moral and so the right thing to do. I think one of the reasons people tend to get a bit defensive when they come across this biocentric argument is because they think this perspective is trying to take away our inherent intrinsic value, but it's not the case. It really recognizes how cool humans are. We are very smart. We are really significant in this system. It just also adds that this value is also the same for all other things because of these three features in particular that are on the slide. So one is humans are just one member of the larger biotic community, or this varied ecosystem, making everything else also important. Humans have the right to flourish within this ecosystem, but only to the extent that they do not degrade or shut down the ecosystem, as everything else is also important. And if other things started to degrade our ecosystem, we would be impacted. So it's all about this balance. An individual animal species and entire ecosystems similarly have the right to flourish within any given ecosystem. These rights must be negotiated and factored into human life as well. So again, I keep repeating myself, but all about that balance of these things. This is why we're also significant, but this is why everything else is also significant and valued. Now, ecocentrism goes a little bit further than biocentrism, because biocentrism does tend to mostly focus on the intrinsic value of animals, including us, and plants, where ecocentrism recognizes that this tends to ignore the potential value of other entities that just happen to be non-living to an extent as well, like mountains, rivers, water, earth, and so on. So ecocentrism realizes that because they are non-living, we tend to automatically view them as instrumental or having instrumental value, because they're just existing to keep us alive and keep us healthy and this planet healthy. So ecocentrism, does go further to say that if we are to respect the natural environment, we need to then respect all aspects of the natural environment, from living to non-living as well. Ecocentrism might sound familiar to you already, because the idea of respecting non-living things like wind, rocks, and soil is an idea held and a lifestyle practice by First Nations peoples around the world, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and their culture. So there continues to be many Indigenous peoples who continue to share their work to challenge anthropocentric knowledge and knowledge production. And significantly, they include country, as this example shows, as a factor as part of their knowledge production within an academic context, which is quite important. And this is a great example, this journal, of course written by humans, but it features the name of country, and the country is recognized as an author here, as a contributor to the work. So the authors are saying, through connecting with country, we have gained understanding, and without it, our insight would not exist. And so country needs to be recognized here. It's also a great pushback against Western academia, which tends to not recognize or value other ways of knowing and sharing knowledge and wisdom. As Indigenous people know country to be a really great teacher, so they naturally have included country here. Alright, this is just the reference list for this presentation. Feel free to review these or just take them into consideration, and I will see you all for week 2 tutorial.